You're listening to the Bail in the Midwest podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Bail in the Midwest podcast, where we explore a variety of topics related to bail, pretrial release, and the criminal justice system in the Midwest. My name is Shane Rolf. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Kansas Bail Agents Association, and I've worked in this field for the past 35 years. Here on the podcast, we talk a lot about so-called bail reform, and bail reformers often take the throw it against the wall and see what sticks approach to anti-bail rhetoric. One argument that has been made is that bail is harmful to women. One of the reasons they throw this argument out is that men make up the vast majority of defendants, and often the women in their lives are the people who are involved in having to post bond for those men. So the argument is bail must be harmful to women since they actually have to provide those services. Additionally, the common perception of the bail bond industry is that it is an industry dominated by men. After all, Dog the Bounty Hunter, one of the famous people in this industry, is a man. Most bail bondsmen in the movies and popular culture, almost always men. Max Cherry from Jackie Brown, Eddie Moscone from Midnight Run, Clint Eastwood as a bounty hunter in Pink Cadillac, and on and on and on. Despite this perception, people are surprised to learn that almost half of professional bail bond companies are owned and or operated by women. So today, we're going to talk to a couple of women who work in the bail bond industry, or as I'll call them, my bond girls, bail bond girls. But in all seriousness, my guests today are both women who are working in the bail bond industry in Kansas and worked in the bail bond industry in Kansas for years. So hopefully we can get some of their perspective on how this works in this particular field for women. Laura Frisbie from the Wichita area sits on the Kansas Bail Agents Association Board of Directors, and Krysta Lane operates or works for Owens Bail Bonds in Arkansas City, which most people would pronounce as Arkansas City, but in Kansas, we prefer to call it Arkansas City. Also, we go by the Arkansas River that runs through Wichita. Laura, Krysta, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Good morning.
All right, so Laura, let's start with you. Give us a little bit of your backstory. How did you come to be involved in what I always loosely refer to as bail world?
Well, I was at a doctor's office for several years, most of my adult life, and I had the opportunity to get into bonding. My ex-husband at the time was going to try to do it, and things didn't work out with him. And I decided, I want to give this a try, and I did. And here I am 13 years later. Best choices I ever made.
And I think that's kind of a common refrain in some senses that, the women that become involved in the bail bond industry often do so through a relationship and find out that they have a particular talent for it.
I think that women in general just look at it a little bit different than men. And so at first, I think it was very hard to fit into the world. But doing it now, I do think that there are some advantages to being women in the industry.
Well, we definitely want to talk about them too. Let's not leave Krysta out in the cold here. It's my understanding, Krysta, that you have more of a law enforcement background. That's a sort of more traditional method of getting into this line of work. Can you kind of give us a rundown of your path to the dark side here?
Sure. I am from Arkansas City. I've lived there almost my entire life. My mom works for the county attorney's office since as far back as I can remember. And my dad is a translator for the county. And my husband was a police officer in Ark City. I worked in pharmacies for several years as a pharmacy technician. And I thought, I just am not making enough money. I'm going to go work at the jail. They had an opening and I went to the Cali County Jail and I got hired. I worked there for about 2 years and there was a bail bondsman that came in and I was just very interested in their line of work and asked a lot of questions, had an opportunity to go out to the Winfield Correctional Facility to work out there. And working out at the correctional facility, I was able to be a bondsman and work out there. So I went to Stephen Owens and he hired me as a bondsman under his company. And here I am in almost my 11th year of bonding.
Now, and both of you have come from different worlds, medical and pharmacy, and I have my own sort of backstory on, when I was in high school, my high school was taking a field trip to the Jackson County Jail in Kansas City, Missouri, and I refused to go. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to be around, those people, basically criminals, people that are in jail. And of course, as life, throws you these curves, you end up working with those people every day. But from both of you, and either one of you can kind of throw this in there, was this an eye-opening experience to another aspect of life that we don't really see until we get into the criminal justice system?
It's very eye-opening. It is a different perspective from being in the jail setting. From my experience working in the jail, seeing them come in at their worst, and also being in the prison system, seeing them sober as well and being sentenced. So in the jail, you're almost, I don't want to say brainwashed, but you're almost brainwashed to see them in a bad light. And you see these bondsmen just coming in and getting them right out. So I felt very jaded at first before I actually knew what bonding was. So that was my experience before being educated in bonding itself.
And so, Laura, from the working in a doctor's office perspective, was this, sort of, a culture shock to come into the criminal justice system?
Very much so. For me, I feel like I was walking around with rose-colored glasses. You assume, until you get to understand it and know it, you assume that everything works like it's supposed to. The criminal justice system is perfect. And, we put bad people in jail. They do what they're supposed to do. And then when you get in it, you realize it's not quite that cut and dry. You realize how bad some of society has gotten. And you realize that there are people in jail that made a mistake. They're misdemeanors and they're not all bad. It was an eye opener, definitely.
I remember one time we were out going to pick somebody up, and we go into the house, knock on the door, and we walk into the room and we're looking for this person in the back room and shine a flashlight in there, and a couple of kids are sleeping on the floor in the room, and there's cockroaches crawling across their arms, and it's like, what? And of course, I come from, a suburban type background. And so that was, sort of a new experience to see that. And it's like, good Lord, this is not the third world. How do we live like this? And, and obviously drugs are a big factor of that, but it's just, it can be pretty horrifying at times. But let's get back to a little more friendly. So in general, as women, because I know Laura kind of brought this up earlier, but what strengths would you say that you guys bring, and maybe guys isn't the right term, but that you guys bring to the table that men often lack in this profession?
I think one of the first strengths is empathy. I think that we tend to not be more emotional, but we tend to listen to people a little bit different. They're more at ease talking with us than they are the men. They think the men are the big, bad, mean bondsmen that are going to come pick them up, and they've just got a different stigma to them. Whereas the women are just a little bit softer. We just deal with them. And sometimes people mistake that, because if I need to go pick someone up, I can do that. And I think they're more surprised when we do sometimes. I know for our company, I have a team of 4 girls, and when we need to pick someone up, the 4 of us go, or, a couple of us will. And if it's something where we do need a male, we've got male employees that do help us. But I think just being able to, I think we listen to people a little bit different, and we relate to them in a different way than the men do.
And I'll piggyback on Laura a minute. Our clients are often, they relate to us a little bit more, and they volunteer more information to us than we ever want to know. And they just kind of connect with us on a different level, to where I feel like we're able to actually help them rather than just be a step in their journey to get through their case.
And with that being said, it's nothing against men or negative towards men. I think we handle it. We deal with it a little bit differently.
One of the things the bail reformers talk about is, that women, often have to be the ones coming down to see the bail bondsman to post bond. And in that sense, women being able to talk to other women about their situation, it just seems like it's a little more, they're going to be a little more forthcoming, a little more open with another woman than they are necessarily with a man.
Right. Here's an example of that. I just recently had a female that came to the jail to bond her boyfriend out, and it was a domestic violence situation. And as we sat there talking, before we wrote the bond, we sat there talking. And, I don't judge her and I don't judge him, but just having that conversation, and she was upset because some things happened in front of her child. She ended up deciding not to bond him, which, I don't try to run them away, but she was able to open up and talk about the abuse. And when we got to talking about it, she just decided maybe it was better to leave him there and to work on herself and, take care of her child. And so I do think that especially the women relate to us and are more open. I cannot see one having that same conversation with a man.
Well, I mean, we do try and be somewhat sympathetic and empathetic to people as well, but
right. No, and I agree. I just don't think they feel as comfortable sometimes with the men.
Absolutely not. I mean, my sister works in my office, and women will come in and they'll sit down, and the next thing I know, I'm listening to her talking. She's talking about their hairstyles and stuff that sounds frivolous, but what she's doing is she's putting them at ease. And finding commonalities, things to talk about with them that, I might go, hey, yeah, I really like your haircut, but that's going to be the extent of it. But she's sitting there talking about other things there that are more relatable. Again, I'm not trying to say that that's frivolous in any fashion, but it does give you common talking points if you're dealing with a large number of women coming in to postpone for people.
Right. Well, that's something else that I think it gives us a little bit of an advantage, because when these women do open up, not only are we talking with them and we're trying to help them, but if something goes wrong with this bond, we know a lot more by having these conversations. So if we have to look for somebody, we've gathered a lot of information from those conversations. I might find out that they have a kid that stays over at this house that they see every Wednesday night, just different things like that. So we take stuff out of that conversation also.
One of the popular people on the right side these days is Jordan Peterson. And he stated on many occasions, and this is looking at the male-female dynamic, that women are more interested in people and relationships, and men are more interested in things. And this sort of impacts their respective career choices. Men often work in fields involving numbers or building things, whereas women often work in fields dealing with people, nurses, teachers, etc. And that women tend to be more empathetic than men, as you mentioned before, Laura. Bail bonds is definitely a job dealing with people, and oftentimes we in bail are forced to deal with some pretty depressing things, as some of the things we've mentioned earlier. I'm curious if you think that being more empathetic is a plus or a minus in the bail bond business, because if you get too empathetic, you can really be taken advantage of.
It does have drawbacks. Sometimes we put trust in people and we probably shouldn't. Sometimes we misjudge. So I think it's also a downfall, but I truly believe that I care about the people. And I'm not saying that men don't at all, so don't interpret that wrong. I think that we truly care about the people we're dealing with. We look at them more as a person and not someone that's gone to jail. I think we have different conversations with them, whether they're right or wrong from the aspect of men and women. I just think we deal with them differently. And the empathy, there have been times empathy has burned me in this business.
Well, tell us a story, Krysta. Tell us about how you've been too empathetic to people, and it's because I know that I've been in the same situations, like, oh, no, I'm sure this will be fine.
When they miss court, I call them frequent flyers. I have a few of them. We all have them. And there's just some that just really tug on your heartstrings a little bit. And you just feel like you can help them and save their life. And you can't, no matter how hard you work on them. They miss court and they have an excuse. And you're like, okay, well, I'm sorry, I'm going to revoke your bond. This is your last chance. And you put them in handcuffs, you take them back to jail. And then they call you 2 days later and they're like, I'm so sorry, Krysta, I missed court. I had the wrong Zoom information, or my mom's in the hospital, or they'll just tell me exactly what they did. I just forgot, or I didn't want to go, or I was scared, whatever. Just give me one more chance. And Okay. So in this county, in Cali County, it's a small county, so we're able to do those things. Okay, I'll go give you another chance. And then they turn around and miss again. Okay, I'll give you one more chance. And then, as a matter of fact, this just happened to me on Monday. Yesterday I had a guy miss court on me again. And I'm like, I can't give him any more chances. And I know he's going to call me later today with another excuse. And it's going to be a really good one because he's really good at it. And it's just going to I don't know, gonna hurt my heart to tell him no. And I just have to tell myself he's not one of my children and put him back in and not answer his phone calls. And he has to just stay. Some of those things just really turn around and they bite you.
Well, and that's sort of another question that leads into this is how do you, I think we've demonstrated that empathy is a good thing and that women generally have more empathy than men in dealing with these things, and you want to maintain that. But I mean, this is the type of work where your empathy can be taken advantage of, and you can become quite jaded and hard in these situations over time. So I've always tried and convince myself that this is a small percentage of the population we deal with, that sort of thing. But how do you make sure that this isn't, hardening your heart or hardening your soul to and be able to keep on over a normal life and still be able to work in the bail bond business and still provide the empathy and the help that we need to provide in the bail bond industry?
We have to keep that in check every day because it is a job that you can become very jaded. And I have to keep myself in check with that all the time because sometimes you just get to the point where you're frustrated. At any given time, if we write bond forfeitures, it's nothing more than a number. I mean, the more bonds you write, the more forfeitures you're going to have. But sometimes you just get so frustrated with them and you just kind of, I don't want to say take it out on everybody, but you just get jaded with it. So it's really hard to keep yourself in check with that. I've learned so much over the years. 5-6 years ago, which I was doing it too long, I should have known better. I had a guy that called me. He had a really sad story and he had the money at home, but he didn't use a bank. He keeps the money in the attic at home. And I really, really believe this guy. Don't ask me why. I just did. And we get to his house and he crawls up in his attic and he comes out and he's like, oh my God, somebody robbed me. So you hear people lie to you and you have to get used to it. And so sometimes it's hard to differentiate when they are telling the truth. It's just hard, but it is very, very easy to become jaded. I've talked with people at the courthouse that work there and they deal with the same thing. It is. And you have to be conscious of it.
That's hard because I deal directly also with the court as well. And I feel like they have that hard shell. So you call and you're like, hey, so-and-so missed court. He works nights. He got off at 6 a.m. He fell asleep and he didn't hear his alarm go off to be there at 9 a.m. Can we please just give him a week? And they're just like, no. To me, is their empathy isn't there, but I'm continue to try to fight for my defendants. And it's hard because they don't believe them at all because they hear all the lies. Well, we hear all the lies too, but when they're being genuine and they're being genuine, it's hard to fight for them because there's 99 lies to that one truth.
Well, and take, for example, like COVID. When COVID first started and they were closing the courts down and it was limited access to the courts and then they were doing Zoom, people would miss. And then they would get a hold of someone and say, I had COVID. Well, then all of a sudden, everybody had COVID, even the ones that didn't have COVID. And it was people just using it as an excuse not to go to court or whatever. And so I think the courts just kind of get tired of it. And, we had one not too long ago. And believe me, they changed their ways. One of our small counties up here sentenced a girl to do 2 years in prison over Zoom and told her to report in at 5:00.
Oh, I'm sure that worked out fine.
Within 2 minutes, her bracelet had been cut off and she didn't turn herself in. But I think the judges are frustrated with it. The court, everybody does. And so it is just a daily struggle to keep it in check.
Well, and we had picked up a guy that I had been looking for months. And I finally found him. We picked him up and we were about an hour away from the jail. And he says, I have COVID in the car. I was like, oh gosh, okay, what do I do? Luckily, I had the judge's cell phone number and called him. And I said, what do I do, Judge? It was a Saturday morning. And he said, you got to let him go. And I had to look for him all over again. And that right there, I'm like, you were in the car with us for a whole hour. You didn't think to tell us that then? So
I think that would have been here, put this mask on and stick your head out the window. You're still going to jail.
The jail wouldn't have taken him, unfortunately.
Yeah, and that was absolutely the go-to excuse during that time. I mean, and people still try and use it. Well, I just tested positive. I'm like, it doesn't have the same impact that it did 3 years ago.
Definitely not.
So some of this jadedness, it's easy, and I find this myself as well, that, you become hardened. And Krysta, from a law enforcement's perspective, I mean, one of the complaints, that people have about police is they become jaded as well, just having to deal with this. You've mentioned the court system, they're all dealing with the same people, the same types of excuses. How do you keep that at work? How do you make sure that I mean, one of my niece used to work for me in my office, and then she went to work for a title company. And so somebody's sitting there in title company trying to get their title insurance filled out and is lying directly to her face. And she could tell, and the other person that was sitting there could tell. And the person's like, "Oh, I've never had anybody just lie straight to my face." And my niece is like, "Well, I have every day. People come into the bonding office." So, but how do you make sure that you don't take that home with you to where, your home life then has some sense of normalcy? I realize we're working, 80, 100 hours a week and we're always on call. So home and work kind of interplay, but how do you separate those two?
Well, my teenager has figured out that it's very hard to lie to his mom, and it's easy to do, I think, just because I've done it for so long. My kids are used to it. Oh, mom's got to go write a bond. But I try really, really hard to keep family life from the jail. I mean, I try not to even have anybody in the vehicle when I go write a bond. I leave my kids at home or, with a babysitter, for example. So when my husband was a police officer, he would get an arrest and he would say, "I just really don't feel like they're being truthful." And he would arrest one person, but let another person go. I'm like, "Oh, who is it?" Because I'm nosy. And I'm like, "Oh, but that person is doing this, 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 and this because they talk to me." So that would give him an in to investigate a little further into things. So as far as separating that, it's hard in a way, but it's also effortless. I don't know. I keep my bag in my car, so I keep my business in there too, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Laura, do you have, similar type experiences? I mean, how do you kind of keep those things separate as you can? I've kind of got another couple of questions related to this, but how do you kind of separate that and make sure that the harshness that we see doesn't necessarily come home?
No matter how hard you try to make it not come home, there are parts of it that do. If you speak to my 19-year-old that just moved out on his own, I became helicopter mom. I tried not to, but I see so much that I worry every moment he goes to leave, So there are some things that I did bring at home. It affected things that I let him do or people that I let him be around because I know what's out there. But when I do come home from work or picking up somebody, the one thing that I don't do, and it took me a long time to learn how to do this, I try not to talk about it at home. I try not to bring the ugliness back home with me because there's a lot of it out there. It's from dogs with worms to babies laying in piles of clothes, people hidden in dryers. I mean, and you come home and you want to tell your husband about it or, because we come home and we talk about work. And so we have to be careful not to bring a lot of that home.
Yeah. I don't even let my kids know when I'm going to do a pickup because they don't need to know that.
Well, and this sort of leads into another kind of question. It's kind of unfair to, saddle this with women. But it's an issue of family life. When I first started doing this, I'd walk out of movies and walk out of dinners. I mean, if I got a call, it was time to go. I mean, and it was a lot easier, I think, for men to put in, 80, 100-hour plus work weeks. But that can be really difficult for women, especially when there's kids around. And it's sort of an unfair question because nobody really asks men, well, how do you manage your work-life balance? Because they just go, well, I'm going to work. How do you guys, though, try and find that right balance between work and home?
I didn't find that balance. I actually took 2 years off when so I have a 14-year-old and then I have an 8-year-old and a 7-year-old. Obviously, they were back to back. Right. I took a year and a half off after my 8-year-old was born and when I was pregnant with my 7-year-old, just because I couldn't do it. Physically, I could not do all the things that are required of a mom. And no matter how much society is like, let's make dads equal. It's not. But I actually had to take time off just so I could collect myself and raise my family a little more. And I'm finally at a point where mom's job is more demanding than dad's now. And my 7-year-old cries every time I leave, every single time, and has since the day she was born. But my husband is learning how to cook, and he does the dishes, he does the laundry, and we are equalizing the home chores. And we have had a lot of talks and a lot of chore charts that mom and dad are included on these chore charts to keep things in order, because this is our main income. So we have to keep it going. Well, and my husband's finally understanding that.
And a lot of people don't really think about this, but it is absolutely not a 9-to-5 job. I mean, it is a 24-hour job. I mean, if they call you at 3:00 in the morning and wake you up, you still got to grog your way through that conversation to decide do I need to get up and go for this? Especially as a smaller agency. If you only have a couple people working there, then you've got to have 24-hour coverage, or you just have to let other people do the bonds that you might otherwise do. So we talked a lot about empathy and how women have that in abundance versus men sometimes, but there's sort of another aspect of it. My mother's nickname, and Krysta, you mentioned that your family had a district attorney's office background, and my mom had worked in the DA's office here in Johnson County and had been a paralegal when we kind of started the bonding company. So there's some history there as well. But her nickname, one of the lawyers she was working for, was Cold Steel. So that was not a nickname that inspired empathy. And so we look at, there is the empathy aspect of things, and I've got another long thing I'll go into on this topic as well. But what do you guys think as far as women's ability to sort of look at things more objectively maybe than men?
I think that women do, but I don't really know why. I think that, I don't want to say we're more open-minded. I think women are just different from men. We deal with things differently. I
feel like maybe we're able to compartmentalize a little bit better, maybe put things in different places. And
well, here I've got sort of a literary reference that I had sort of planned out for this. It's something that's always stuck with me. How you read something and then it's like, oh, that makes sense, and it comes from weird sources. And so I'm probably going to get in the weeds here a little bit and date myself. But when discussing the differing approaches to life that women and men sometimes take, I'm reminded of an interaction in Anne Rice's book, The Vampire Lestat. If you're not familiar with that, Interview with the Vampire was the first book, and there was the movie with Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise. The second book was The Vampire Lestat. Now, Lestat was Anne Rice's favorite character, and so Lestat, goes through the entire, all of the vampire series. There's some connection to Lestat there. But Lestat is turned into a vampire in this book, and this is his backstory, and he really struggles with the moral implications of his new status, particularly that he has to kill to feed and survive. And there's chapter after chapter of him trying to justify his actions and feeling bad and morally conflicted about what he's become. At some point in there, though, he reunites with his mother, Gabrielle, who's dying of tuberculosis. And kind of along the lines of, Twilight and Saving Edward from Spanish flu, he turns her into a vampire to save her from dying from tuberculosis. Now, once she's a vampire, she doesn't hesitate. I mean, it's like, turned on a light switch and feed upon the first person she comes across. And Lestat describes her as a lioness taking down a deer. None of the hesitation, none of the concerns that he has, and none of the self-recrimination and self-flagellating that Lestat's been going through for all this. She's very matter-of-fact and very practical. Now, that could be a consequence of her age, because obviously she was an older woman at the time. She'd had a number of children, many of who hadn't survived. So she had dealt with the harshness of life. And sometimes I think you get the argument that, Lestat seems to credit her adaptation, that quick adaptation to her being a woman and having to deal with life differently than men, that allowed her to accept her new reality without the self-torment that he did. So I'm probably going off in the weeds here a little bit, but it just seems like the experience that women have in having to adapt to situations, that you're not necessarily going to go out and brawl somebody, but you have to work things through differently. It's sort of the same queen bee arguments that women tend to be a lot more snarky with each other than men do, because men, the argument is that you get too snarky and somebody might just punch you in the face. So men take those approaches a little bit differently than women do. But does that maybe give women more of a strength in being more flexible in dealing with these sorts of situations? It's kind of a long way around, but what are your thoughts on how women see the world, as it is or as they would like it to be? And does either of those help in working in bail?
I think that women learn when they get married and they have families, women tend to just do what needs to get done. And so I think that everything, like with me, everything's a challenge. And I like challenges and I like to multitask and I can have all these different things going on, but we get it done. And I think that with bonding, you might have 10 calls coming in, but you got to get your kid over here. And what am I doing for dinner? We just handle it. I don't know if it's multitasking or we just deal with it. When you're getting these phone calls and you've got 50 different conversations going on, we just handle it. And I think that we're just taught that. And in society, when you grow up, you get married, and this is what we do.
Well, there's the old, behind every, great man is a strong woman, that doesn't necessarily mean the woman. And what that sort of means is that the woman's helping organize things. And so, that doesn't necessarily have to stay in the background. So if you're
Right.
a strong woman and can organize these things and, bring those, talents to the fore, you don't have to be the person that stands in the background. And those types
No.
of talents work well in this field.
I just, like Laura said, we just do it. I mean, my kids are in activities all over the place. I feel like I spend 99% of my time in my vehicle. So I just do it. And just Sunday, I believe it was Saturday. It was Saturday. I was working 5 different bonds at one time. Also garage sailing with my mom, and I went to a funeral and hanging out with my friend, and all at the same time. I did it all, and I got them all written, and everything was done, and everybody's still alive, and it's all good. All my kids are fed, and it's fine.
And I really want to point this out. When I come home, my husband is my backbone. I mean, he's the one that helps me be able to do what I do. He pulls his weight, and we are in sync enough that if I've got to go, he picks up the slack, just the same as when he's at work. Now, we have moments when he's at work and I've got to go. When the kids were younger, it's like, okay, now what? But he's my backbone at home, and he just kind of knows. But that's a whole nother thing. I feel that it is very hard for a man to be with a woman that does bail bonds. That is something that's a lot, because we are independent and we are on the go so much. I think that is a challenge. And
I mean,
I know
it's literally the
husband,
drop of a hat. Sorry, Laura, but it's like the drop of a hat. I mean, I live 30 minutes from the jail. Hey, I got to go write a bond.
Yeah,
and they just have to be okay with it.
And there's not an extraordinary amount of men that can deal with what we do. If they are with a man, I've got to give kudos to them, because
absolutely
it's big.
I mean, in my own defense, or my wife's defense anyway, she's had to put up with a lot from me as well, because there are plenty of, hey, I got to walk out the door and go. And it is, in any relationship, it's really difficult for your partner not to feel like they're a priority. And so when that phone call rings and that's some, buddy that just drunk and driving, and somehow they're a priority over your relationship, you got to have a pretty strong relationship to get through that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
And I think this particular kind of job, whether you're a female doing it or a man, this is a job that I think that the relationships that they have at home with their partner, those are very solid, strong relationships.
You did mention having to pick up and go and pick people up at 2:00 in the morning. So let's talk some bounty hunting too, because that's Dog the Bounty Hunter aside. The other big name, albeit a fictional name in popular culture, is Stephanie Plum. I don't know if either one of you have read those books. As female bounty hunter based in New Jersey. They're essentially romance novels, set against in a bail bond background. But there's a lot of somewhat accurate aspects of that. It's fiction, so it's overblown. For those who haven't read the book, the first book was made into the movie One for the Money with Katherine Heigl. And fugitive apprehension, however it's done, whether you're talking people in, or whether you're Stephanie Plum and locking people in cooler trucks, it is an integral part of the bail bond business. Defendants will miss court, and they have to be returned to court somehow. Now, smaller bond operations often handle this all in-house, meaning they have to go pick up their bond skips themselves. Others hire out the work. I know a lot of 65, 7-year-old bail bondsmen, or men who are physically incapable of chasing a fugitive down the street. If truth be told, I'm probably not likely to outrun somebody who's 20 years old and tackle them to the ground. But I know there are women who work in this field, and women as bail bondsmen have to get their people back in too, and some do it quite well. And so, do you guys do that yourselves? And how do you handle that when you have to go get somebody back into custody who's missed court?
Well, it's usually myself. And since my husband's no longer a police officer, he will go with me and he lets me take charge, which as he should. And he steps back and he just lets me do it. If it's not him and I, since we're far away from where Laura's at, it's Laura and I, and then another female agent, and we get a lot of doors opened for us. Actually, I mean, we're more apt to get a door open for 3 females than 1 man, actually. But if there's a dog, Laura will not go.
I don't have your back. I don't have your back.
She will tell you that.
You can take the nicest dog in the world that would not bite anybody, but if you are picking up their owner and there's any kind of a struggle, that dog will turn so fast. So yes. No, I do not have your back if there's a dog. I just put that out there.
We'll pick up bad guys all day long, but there's a dog, Laura's out.
Well, I can understand that.
I don't like dogs. And I love dogs, but I don't like dogs working.
Stranger dogs.
No.
But actually the pickups are one of my favorite things. It's just the hunt and the reward of finding the person. It's fun. It's also very demanding and also very draining and very frustrating when you hit house after house after house after house and you can't find them and the bond's $1,000.
Right.
Or $2,000 or something so stupid, and then you get these high bonds that are $50,000-$60,000 and you never hear from these people ever again. So it's those small bonds that are so frustrating. We chase those more than anything.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, there's reasons for that, but I mean, a serious felony is less likely to miss court than your failure to appear on a traffic ticket.
That is true.
Crazy.
That is the truth, and people don't think that, but that is the absolute truth. It is those little misdemeanors that are the worst.
Well, and that's something that people really do forget about is the time that's involved in somebody missing court. I mean, you may go post this bond and you took your $100 or $200 fee off that, and then you had to pay your insurance costs and everything associated with that. So you walk off with your $50 or $60 for that, and then that person misses court, and then you've got to go spend $100 in gas and 15 hours of time trying to find that person and get them back in on that. Largely you can't bill your cosigner, your indemnitors for that, because it's just your time. Versus if you just pay somebody to go pick them up, well, I can pass that bill along. I mean, that was something that happened to me years and years ago. I'd spent 25 hours. I mean, because I was sitting on this house making sure the guy was in there before we ever had to go in and pick him up. And finally we went in and did it. And I submitted a bill, to her, because at the time I was a licensed private detective. And it's like, hey, I can bill my time hourly for this. And, we end up taking her to court, and the judge's like, yeah, you can't get that. You can't collect that. You can only collect the money that you spent, not your time. It's like, well, thanks. Anyway, let's talk on one other topic here, and then we can see if we can wrap this up. My daughter graduated from college, and she sort of kind of works for me, but she absolutely refuses to transport any defendants. Now, she's a smaller girl, and so she's very much concerned about safety issues. Now, part of this is because she hasn't been around, people all that much as far as, the people. And again, criminal defendants, but they are still just people. But as bail bondsmen, we are putting ourselves in closer proximity to people who are more likely to commit crimes. So what steps do you both take to increase your personal safety, or is that something that you don't really worry about?
Honestly, for me, my husband decided that I needed this, and that. So I actually have leg irons. I have shackles. They always go in the back passenger. We have the child safety locks on because they'll jump out of the car. And for me, when I transport, especially by myself, their hands are always behind their back. But we do try to secure them so that they absolutely cannot interfere with us while we're driving. It is something that we are very cautious of. And normally we do like to have a couple of us when we're transporting, but it does happen where there's just one. We try to do what we can to be safe, but we also know the risk.
Well, I mean, is there a concern that you guys might be the target of somebody wanting to, rob you or attack you or something along those lines?
I think for a long time, especially here where I live, because it is such a big county and the crime is very high here, there's been times where I take money at the jail and it'll be a large amount, and going home, it'll be late at night. I zigzag going home. I'm driving, I don't go straight home. I'm very careful not to let anybody know where I live. There's a lot of concerns like that, and we just try to be as diligent as we can.
When I leave the jail, I don't ask the officers to do this. They just do it on their own because they're, like I said, I've been bonding at that jail for a long time and I know all the officers very well. So they watch me on the camera. I park in the same spot every time. They watch me get to my vehicle and drive away, especially at night. If it's a large amount of a bond, I always make sure, hey, can you make sure that I make it to my vehicle okay? Because I know one of these days somebody is going to come out of the woodwork and just take my money or something, or try to let the person in my vehicle escape, or, I went through all those trainings when I worked at the prison and stuff, doing those high risk transports and stuff. So I'm very vigilant on those things.
So let's bring this back around to our original premise of the bail reformers. Even if that premise is correct, that women are the ones who often have to post bail for their men, is that necessarily a bad thing that they have that degree of control over that situation? Or more generally, is secured bail actually harmful to women?
I don't think it's a matter of having control. I think it's a choice. And, they don't have to have their spouse get them out. If the female chooses not to, they can call their parents, they can call anybody. So I don't necessarily think it's a thing of control. And as far as conditions on a bond, there are times that we will make specific conditions, but we also at the same time, whether it's the men or the women that like to call and they'll say, I want to revoke the bond because they get into a spat. We're very cautious of that. I know our company, we don't, unless it is a legitimate concern, we don't run right over and pick people up and revoke their bonds. So I think that people, whether it's men or a man or a woman, I don't think that necessarily puts one or the other in control. I think both of them can play control games, but I think it's anybody's choice. And as far as a female, if she decides not to get somebody out of jail, it's just a choice. It's not control to me. I think that they can call anybody to get them out.
Well, true, but we're not going to just accept anybody walking down the street to guarantee the bond. We're going to want somebody that has some degree of connection to them, some degree of, maybe control is not the right word, but some sort of connection to that person before we agree to post that bond.
I mean, you can make any bond good by your co-signers, by your indemnitors, but it doesn't have to be the spouse. You've got some people have a dear friend that they've been friends with for 20 years that might work at Spirit. I mean, there are other choices. If somebody doesn't want to do that bond, there should be other alternatives. And if there's not, it's probably not a good bond.
Yeah, we've had that discussion on the podcast many times. If you don't have anyone available that can help you post this bond, that's probably more telling than anything else about your situation.
Right. And I think, a lot of times we get people if their parents don't want to co-sign their bond, there's a problem usually. Because that is the one, almost everybody at some point they gravitate back to their parents. Their parents know where they are, what they're doing. And if your parents want nothing to do with it, it usually is a good sign, probably not a good bond.
I'll throw out one scenario here that we get a lot, and it brings back the parents thing, but we'll get the call from the grandparents. Oh, I need to get Junior out. What's going on? He's not there. It's like, okay, where are his folks? Well, they don't want to help him out. And it's like, maybe you better reconsider this, Grandma, because I know you feel bad and I know he's your baby, grandson. But if his parents are leaving him there's probably a reason for that.
Mm-hmm. And part of that, when you're a bondsman, I think it is just a matter of, I think there's a lot of gut intuition with all of this. And I think that sometimes when you're dealing with somebody that nobody wants to co-sign for them, it is what it is, and you have to walk away from it. But, I think most of the bond calls that we get, most of the people that come through can usually find someone. I'm hesitant on co-signers. I don't like to do grandparents that are 90 years old that might not be here in the next 2 years on a $100,000, $200,000 murder charge. That makes me nervous. So, but I definitely think that any bond you can find a co-signer if it's a good bond.
Right. If it's
I
worth
think,
doing. Okay.
yeah, people would not understand the calls we take. A few years back, I had a girl call me. She didn't have any money, and I felt for her. I did. I felt really bad. And she offered to give me her father's ashes to hold as collateral until she could pay me. What do I even say to that?
No.
It takes them all.
No.
I was
Say no.
speechless, and that doesn't happen very often, but I was truly speechless.
Well, I
Oh.
mean, I guess from the women in bail perspective, these sorts of stories are not the things we traditionally think that in polite society that women have to deal with. But, it certainly seems that you guys have both shown that women are more than capable of doing this sort of work. And often, because of some of the innate abilities that women have, they can sometimes do the job better than men can, particularly in those interpersonal relationships.
I do want to say, though, the men are such a crucial part of this industry. There are things and there are times when we go pick up somebody, we couldn't do it on our own. I don't like to admit that, but there are times when we're dealing with someone, we look at their charges, and sometimes these are really, really bad people. And there's times that as females, we're not comfortable. And we do holler at the men in our company, hey, we need you. And it just works. And there might be times when they can't get through to a co-signer. They're trying to find somebody, and we are able to call for them and open that communication up a little bit better. So I think it just works.
Well, and knowing that, I think in the fugitive apprehension realm of things, women are going to be a lot more careful about planning how that apprehension takes place. They're not just going to go, well, macho man, I'm just going to kick in this door and drag this person out, and then get yourself in all kinds of trouble and possibly get hurt. You're going to have a much more deliberate approach to picking people up, just because there is the concern about the physical aspect of it.
Right.
Well, and something else, I personally myself, and I don't know if this goes for all females, but for me, something that I learned a long time ago, when I have to go pick somebody up, I am never angry at that person. I might be frustrated. In my head, I get what's going on in their head. I understand they don't want to go to court. I understand they don't want to go to jail. So I never take that personal.
We just go in and get the job done.
Well, there you go. I think we've probably reached about our time on this, and I want to thank you both for taking the time to talk to me. Again, I think it's something that most people don't really understand, just how many women are involved in this field. And I think being able to work with both men and women in this field is incredibly important. We all bring different strengths to it. So I do appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today, and hopefully you have a good rest of your day, guys, or ladies.
Thank you, Shane. All right. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today on the Bail in the Midwest podcast.